Welcome to the Second Bite Podcast, where we talk with top entrepreneurs and CEOs about creating valuable companies through creative transactions. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome back to the Second Bite Podcast. I am looking forward to my conversation today with Jim Price, who's the CEO of Empower out of Ohio. Jim, very happy to have you on board with us today. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me, Todd.
Jim, this is going to be a really good conversation. We're going to get a really good behind the scenes look. You've been more of an acquirer than a seller in the past. And I think you've got some interesting perspectives from that angle that we really want to kind of get into a little bit. Before we do that, I want to just take a second and thank our sponsor, which are the people at TeamShares. I don't know if you know about TeamShares. They're a really interesting private equity group out of New York City. Their intent is that when they acquire a business, they pay almost all cash at close. And then their intent is to gradually get ownership of the company into the hands of the employees over the next 7 to 10 years. They want a majority of equity to be owned by the employees, which I thought sounded too good to be true until I've done a successful transaction with them. And they're great to work with, really good people, smart people. So thanks to the folks at TeamShares. Let's get into business at hand, Jim. We've known each other now for a while. We've looked at a couple potential acquisitions. Haven't gotten anything over the finish line yet. But you've got a really interesting view on how you do transactions and the things you're looking for. And maybe we can talk in specific about some of the things that have worked well for you. Before we do that, give me a quick history on you, because it's fascinating history to the company. But then tell me, who is Empower and who do you serve and what do you do for them?
Sure. Well, Todd, thanks for having me. And just for clarification, it is Ohio, but it's specifically Cincinnati, which is a big part of my history because I am born and raised in Cincinnati. It's a big part of who I am. And for those who are not familiar with Cincinnati, we really kind of call ourselves a consumer marketing capital, given that we have the two large companies primarily here, Fortune 500, of Kroger and P&G. And that goes back to the history of who I am and how I was raised, because my mom was a P&G-er for many years and was at P&G, very involved in their media practice, and was instrumental in many people know the soap operas over at Procter & Gamble, and that was a big part of who they were. And my mom was a pioneer in bringing the soap operas to P&G. And then as media began to be, in media, when I talk about media, I'm really talking about media planning and buying, the placing of ads, across different channels. And she became an expert in that, and eventually left P&G and started her own agency, which we originally called Media That Works. And that was in 1985. And it was really when cable television came onto the scene and media began to bifurcate, and there was so many different choices out there. And there's always this battle between the medias and the creatives, or the data scientists and the art directors. And she was really more on the data science of advertising. And we were a media planning and buying shop for many years. And she left in the late 90s. Her first client was Lens Crafters. Get your eyeglasses in about an hour. And she worked with Dean Butler, who started that business. And their little shtick was go market to market. They went from little Cincinnati to eventually they had over 300 markets. They built customized local media plans. They put Dean in front of the camera in his lab coat, and they grew that business tremendously. Eventually, when it was sold to USU and then Luxottica. But she left the business in the late 90s, is exactly when I started. I started when she left, and I brought the kind of, I would call, the interactive components to Empower. So I'd done a fantastic internship in college, different places at radio stations, agencies, and then did one at a really fantastic, one of the pioneers in digital media. They were called Beyond Interactive. They were up in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Really smart guys. I was able to go take a summer and do some work for them, but also go through their training programs. They were being acquired by Gray at the time, so I got to see what that looked like as well. literally, not only was I doing training, but I was building desks as they were growing. It was just a fabulous experience being around these guys. So I got to see that firsthand, what that looked like, what it looked like for some entrepreneurs kind of being sold to, a large holding company agency, uh, as I was like, 19, 20 years old. But so I left there, joined Empower, and ever since have kind of been what I say my career has been all about embracing the ongoing diversity of media. Because as we know, it constantly changes every day, something new is invented. Today we're buying ads in the metaverse. Who would have ever thought that would have occurred
Nothing.
20
Yeah.
years ago. So that's really been who I've, to sum up my 20 some year career, it's always been about thinking, I say creating for the future. Obviously, there's a lot of managing the present, or I call selectively forgetting the past that has to be done at the agency. But my passion is really about managing for the future, or I should say creating for the future and bringing those new capabilities to the agency.
And what's the size of Empowered when you joined in '90? Where it is today, either by revenue or media or people? Maybe
Sure.
you can put that in perspective.
Yeah, when I joined in, literally I joined on Y2K. If anybody remembers that, that was literally my first day of work when everybody thought their computer was gonna explode. But uh, that was, I'd say we probably had 75 folks. Today we have about 250, and across three offices. We were just one office back then, and we've really our story has been what I think, Todd, you kind of classified this little discussion as going at it alone a little bit, which was very much around growing organically. And we've done a few acquisitions here and there, and I've had varying different levels of experience with those. But yeah, it's been a really good growth story. We've just kind of kept at it. And my parents were very involved in the business always up until I'd say 7, 8 years ago, and officially 5 years ago, I bought the business 100% from them.
And just as a quick side note, what's the pressure like when you're the next generation that takes over a business? Clearly not qualified in the eyes of some. Clearly, there's all the issues that go around the next generation. What was it like for you, and what kind of pressure did that add?
Yeah, well, it was funny because it's all I ever remember, because 1985 is when the business started. I was, 7 or 8 years old at the time, so I've never really felt it's always just part of the fabric of my life is this business. It's especially when both of your parents are involved, it dominates the dinner conversation sometimes. So, and I had learned all the acronyms by the time I was 12. So the pressure is never real. The pressure really happened when I started to really own the business, because then you really feel the pressure. Because not only do I have to, make sure I'm running a healthy business, but I bought the business from my parents, and so I have to earn earn the profit to pay them back for the business, because I have a note essentially that I have to deliver on to them. And so it's not, and it's a little bit more pressure because not only are you, have to pay back a note, but it's for your parents who you obviously care about a lot, and you want to see have a nice retirement and do the things that they want to do, and give back to all the opportunities they gave to me. So there is a little bit of added pressure on that. But having grown up with that pressure of running a business and seeing my parents do it for now 38 years, it becomes kind of part of the fabric of who you are.
And as we sit here in the middle of 22, you've been at this now for a long time, and you've built a great business. I'm sure that you get constant knocks at the door
Mhm.
from private equity groups, people that want to invest, people that want to acquire, and you've never taken on outside capital, even for the acquisitions you've done. Can you talk about the I guess probably the struggle about, gee, should we do it or not, and why you've always decided not to?
Yeah, well, I do get a lot of knocks at the door, and I say thank you, and then I file them away in a folder, for potentially a later date, and it's been interesting. I actually have been on this a little bit of a crusade, because I had shareholders in the business other than myself that my parents, you wanted to have stick around, so they essentially gave equity up in the business. And so a big part of my goal was to actually try to get some of that equity back. So, over time, I think I had 7 or 8 other shareholders. I'm down to 1 now. So a big part of my plan was to try to earn back some of those shares. Also, in a business like ours, you're always, reevaluating talent, looking at new talent. So I that was a big. I felt like I wanted to get through that. I'm almost, the one shareholder I have left, I think, is an extremely valuable employee, and she and I are very locked up in what we want to do going forward. So that's where I've been on that. Um, but I guess it's a little bit different when you have a family business, and I'm second generation. And it's not that I'm waiting around to pass it on to my my kids. Uh, but it's part of it. Like I said, to me, it's a fabric of who you are. I'm not a hired gun brought in to run a business. I am. This has been who we are, and so and it's a business that's very much around, it's purpose driven, it's mission driven, we have very clear specific values that are about who we are. It's entrepreneurial. So it's so much and it's like your little baby. You want to take good care of it, and you think, like, how can I just nurture it and keep growing it, without essentially doing things differently? But I am rethinking that these days, to be honest, because when you get to a certain size, 250 employees, uh, you know, uh, 3 offices, lots of varying capabilities. You got to then you like I'm in the next stage of growth now, where I'm starting to think, like, how do I do this a little bit differently? And it's not just about nurturing this baby through organic growth anymore.
Yeah, and so you talked a lot about the positives, right? To being the sole and majority shareholder. What do you think some of the negatives are that are causing you to rethink that a little bit?
Sure. The negatives is the big negative is, well, there's a few. One is it's pretty lonely at the top. I've always said that it is. And I do have a board. It's an advisory board. I put that in 6 or 7 years ago. I felt like I wanted to have it so that I had a level of accountability that I didn't feel like I was getting from my parents. So that's a big one. I'd say the second one is just I guess why I'm rethinking this a little bit is just access to capital. You know, I feel like we have a great business, but it's really hard to grow without access to capital. And why capital is really you know I'd say easier to come by these days. We are a little bit more conservative, and I don't particularly love debt on the balance sheet. It's a great cash flow business, so there's a lot of you wonder, like, oh god, it's cash flowing really well right now. Why would I want to do anything differently? But we kind of say now we're at a point where we're kind of punching above our weight class now, where we've got some new clients that are really pushing us, and if we don't potentially think differently about how to grow it strategically with partnerships or a different kind of capital stack, then we could potentially start going backwards.
Sure. When Now you've done a couple of acquisitions. How many acquisitions have you done in the past?
I've done 3.
And what would you say are lessons learned from those acquisitions? And whatever else you can share about them, right? Because we obviously talk a lot about the second bite here and the opportunity for somebody to sell and get a second bite. That can be represented in earnout. That can be represented in equity. You've come up with some creative ways of doing it. Tell us about how you've structured the acquisitions you've done, and tell me, specifically what attracted you to the companies that you acquired.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing I've learned is I've got to and what I'm doing now is just be much more strategic about how I go through a period, an acquisition process. So, I think, Todd, that's why I've gravitated towards you is, a lot of times is I think you're very strategic in how you think about it, how you approach it. Like, previously I was, to use a different word, I was rather opportunistic, I would say, in how I did acquisitions. And largely they were driven around capabilities that I thought we didn't have or needed to add to the agency that could punch us into new markets or different types of clients. So
So take me to acquisition number one. Tell me about what that company was and how the opportunity came about and what they did for you.
Sure. So acquisition number one was a company called the Market Intelligence Group. We just called them MIG. And they were small. Most of these are small acquisitions. They were 15 more data scientists. It was, I want to say, about 10 years ago, and trying to just uh, grow our analytics capabilities. They did have a product that they called Data Well, which was you know, um, basically they were a kind of a pioneer in creating this cloud-based software that allowed you to kind of roll in different marketing capabilities, or I should say, measure all the different marketing activity that was happening across uh, the different work that you might be doing in across channels. So, but it was really more about the talent. They were in Cincinnati. They were, I felt like, good group of guys. They'd been around a long time. They had major experience with Kroger here in town. That was acquisition number one, and you know,
So, so let me just ask with those. So I know you're a smart guy. You grew up in the business. You're part of YPO. You've got a good
yep,
resource of people, but you just hired 15 scientists,
yeah.
right? In kind of an area that you weren't strong at, so you didn't know it well. How did
Mhm.
you know how to integrate them, and how did it go? What surprised you the most from trying to integrate
Yeah, well, I guess the biggest, and this goes back to everything, is like everything looks really good on paper.
it?
You know, everything looks good on paper. You like, oh, I could see how this guy and his talents, he could fit right in here. And oh, and sure, Robert can work alongside Julie. Why wouldn't they be able to work along? They're both really smart, and Julie has these media expertise, and she's more analytically minded and research oriented. He's analytical, but he's more, media, or I should say, he can see the whole marketing ecosystem better. He's been doing these tech. Sure, these two can work together. Nope. Yeah, can't work together for whatever reason. And it just goes back to, I think, Drucker's old quote which is like, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah.
It's just, and why I thought it could all work great. And, these two were kind of co-leads of this practice. I thought they could work together. They couldn't, and they just butt heads. And, Robert had a way of doing things. Julie had a way of doing things. And,
How do you
hindsight.
solve how do you solve something like that?
Well, I'll tell you what I then did was tried another acquisition to solve it.
So tell me about number two.
So number two was a company called Powerhouse Factories, and I became enamored. Like when you're in the media space, you're always like you always want the other piece, which is the creative side of the business. You're always like, how do we? It's a logical extension to what we do. We're helping clients, plan and buy their advertisements across all these channels. You always get frustrated because the message never matches the media when you can go. So, and we never really, and we also want to do some more brand work. I saw the opportunity to do brand work, and frankly, the opportunity to potentially do some work with P&G, who was historically, part of who we were, given my mom had grown up there. But, they like to work with big media agencies. They had to have global scale. So we never really got any business from them. And I always thought it was a little bit brick out of place considering we're right down the street from them. So I was like, how could we generate, some different capabilities that will allow us to get inside P&G? So I found these guys that were really into, frankly, it's kind of bizarre. They were really into developing rock posters. Okay. But they really understood culture, and they would create all these installations, and they would kind of get these new audiences excited about brand marketing as well. So they had a really interesting offering. They called it culture-led, data-fed brand building, kind of. And so I was like, okay, the data-led stuff, we could roll the analytics guys into that. These creative guys that make rock posters, and they had their 80% of their business was with P&G. And so I'm like, this could be a win. It's a new client, and they were kind of under the radar in P&G, and P&G had all these large procurement practices, and they were finding their way around that and all that kind of stuff. So that was acquisition number two. And this was also, Todd, when I was in a place to where the market was looking to buy. I felt like this is when everybody was having they wanted their digital agency, they wanted their brand agency, they
Right.
wanted their PR agency. They were they were buying, the market at that point was buying best in class agencies by capabilities because digital had come on the scene. There were all the, people weren't getting digital expertise from their typical historic relationships. So they were going out and buying specific things. So I was like, how could we create, a best in class model? So I went out and had this brilliant, which is now kind of a dumb idea, frankly, to create what I called the Empower Group. And I had Powerhouse, which was doing brand building. I then created a content marketing agency through a couple of hires called Magnetic Content Solutions. Then I had Empower, which was the media agency. And so the goal was there is like the Empower Group could come work for you across, brand building, content marketing. We were like writing content for clients. We're building their blogs out at that point, their their SEO, their whole content strategy, and then we do all the media planning and buying. And I was like, this is fantastic. I'm covering a lot of different capabilities. We can put these together. I have 3 leaders of these businesses. And what I failed to realize is that, you're all in the same building. You're all fighting for different things. You have 3 different P&Ls. Culture was like getting all out of whack. There was 3 different cultures. Powerhouse was on one floor and they had black walls and rock posters up, and Power was down on another. We had green walls and data analytics people walking around, and it just, all of a sudden there was work orders between agencies, and we try to pitch clients together, and people were stepping on each other's toes, and it was just a disaster, a complete disaster.
With the benefit of hindsight, if you're going to grade yourself on MIG and then Powerhouse, scale of 1 to 10, looking back, what would you give yourself as a grade on each of them?
A D.
On both.
Yeah. Well, I think MIG would have worked out better. I eventually tried to roll some of the MIG stuff into Powerhouse and create this, what I called like this brand building that had data scientists kind of with it, which I
Right.
thought was really a compelling offering. But you can't get guys that create rock posters and really cool brand ideas to work with guys that like to sit and work in, Excel spreadsheets all day. That just does not work. So it's just back to the. So I think the MIG thing would have been more successful. What I eventually ended up doing, it was a 3-year run of the Empower Group. What I eventually did was kind of unwind all of it, roll it all back into Empower, and I sold the Powerhouse business back to the 2 original founders, and they went back and just did their thing.
And then did you learn from that experience, and did it make you any better at acquisition number 3? Tell me about that one.
Well, acquisition number 3 was much more of a simpler acquisition, and that was a smaller creative agency. They were called Proclamation. And really what I wanted was the chief creative officer in that one. It was really a talent. I don't know if anybody knows out there listening, a guy named Dhani Jones. He was an NFL football player. He played for the Bengals. He's a real creative, went to the University of Michigan. He's a very well-connected guy. He and Jeff Warman paired up and created this little creative agency. And Jeff was one of he's always been thought of as like the lead creative guy in Cincinnati. Everybody loves. So I really wanted him. So I brought him over. And here's the thing I learned with that one. It helped. Like I'd say that's been the most successful because it spurred us into creative capabilities. Jeff's not here anymore, but it pushed us into creative. We have a really good, I'd say, small and mighty creative team here today that Jeff helped pioneer. But what I learned with that one is you never really want to take for granted the client business. I got that business, and very quickly a couple clients left. So I really had to roll it over, and luckily we were able to generate some business from our clients and some new clients. But very quickly, there was some client issues there that I didn't kind of realize. And I think if I went back, I probably should have, directly talked to some of those clients before I did the deal.
Yeah.
It's part of due diligence.
I know a lot of folks listening think about acquisition from time to time, and there's parts of it that when you see it done really well seem easy, perhaps. can you talk a little bit about how you structure, because you're trying to get more equity for yourself, right? To
Yeah.
minimize your shareholders, not to increase them. We talk a lot about the second bite, which in a lot of cases involves equity. How did you structure those deals? And what problem do you think you were solving for the entrepreneur that made him want to join Empower?
Most of the deals were structured on an earnout based on the client business that they had or any new business that we could roll over to. So they were incentivized on a percent of gross, essentially, on the client businesses, anything they could generate over a period of time. I think if I remember back, generally around 3 years was the typical. So that's how they were essentially paid for the equity of their business that we acquired. Other than that, it was just simply rolling them into kind of some of our management incentive based plans. I have a long-term incentive plan that I've had in place for a while. So really wanted them to feel, like they're part of the team, and consistency across the way everybody
Right.
else kind of incentivize as well. So I haven't really had to give up. I never, and it was very clear, there was no equity in our current business available.
Right. So let's give a good takeaway here. Having done three
Mhm.
to varying degrees of success, is there one red flag you would tell people to look for, and to look for it early and often in your transactions, that was consistent in each of those, that you wish you would have picked up on earlier or done differently?
Yeah, I think the I went into these like, and I've explored some other deals since then, certainly, but I really went into these deals with the idea around I'm going to make them happen, right? And it felt like hell or high water. I wanted this, and I wanted to make it happen. I think I've looked at a couple other deals recently, and I've said no. And what I've done is I've learned from those deals, which is going to make me better for the next deal that comes along. But going into it and just being very clear around expectations, being more transparent, frankly, it's a tough one, but I've always operated, or I've always managed in a very inclusive fashion. Being very transparent with the folks that would be involved in that business to say, what do you think about it? Here's how it would roll in. Let's talk about how this would work with because what I have learned is that I have the type of company that it has to be integrated. If I can't figure out how to integrate it into the company, and people aren't saying, I'll run through a brick wall and help, integrate that with you, then it's not going to work. And the principal at the other company has to feel like they want to integrate into our agency. If it's not immediately, but over time. I think, Todd, one of the deals we talked about was, an interesting new capability, but when we got to the finish line, it was like, you can operate this way, but eventually I want you to be part of Empower. I don't want to just manage this out here. And I think that's tricky. I think what I did learn was also, I tried to integrate them too fast. So potentially, and that's how sometimes they might have lost their client because they lose their focus. So you might say, I'll bring you in. Okay, let's give you a year and just business as usual. You know, we own you now. Just go for it. But we're going to meet and we're going to continue to, as you learn about our agency, we're going to figure out a way to integrate you in maybe in year 2 or year 3.
Right.
That's the biggest thing I've learned. And then just in making sure that's all clear and you're always talking about it.
Yeah, it's interesting because having the fortune to work and to see really good private equity groups, right?
Mhm.
Like the people at Trivest, we just closed a transaction with the people at Gemini. We were fortunate enough to do a couple of deals with Everlane and some others. And these are guys that are very experienced at doing it. Not only do they have money to help you do a transaction, it's different when you have a board of advisors and when you have an equal partner that's got as much to lose in something as you do, right? You take that feedback, I think, a little bit differently.
Mhm.
And I hear that probably more often than anything else is that the integration is the most important thing.
Mhm.
And everything, like you said, does look good on paper. but you're going to hit bumps in the road. It's going to be difficult. It's always difficult, maybe because it's new, and you need a solid partner in who that other CEO is that's going to come on board and essentially be your partner for a long period of time, right?
Yeah. And I think that's why I'm very interested in if I do a deal going forward, either an acquisition or, I decide to find a creative way to get capital to grow the business, is that I really want a strategic partner, you know?
Yeah. So let's use that as a transition. You've been opportunistic in the past. Now, as you're thinking more strategically, when you think about Empower and the direction you're moving to in the future, what do you have on your list of priorities that you would like to add to the business from a capability or a geography or a
Mhm.
customer standpoint?
Yeah, I think we've proven out over the last 3 or 4 years, and COVID actually helped us, frankly, because it allowed us to get into new markets and hire really strong people. Like Chicago, we've gone from 20 to 60 people. Atlanta, we've gone from 0 to 20, in the middle of COVID. Geographically is not like we can do that organically. It's hiring one strong person or a good leader, getting finding markets that are really strong talent. I think always with agencies where you want to go is varying capabilities. And I've seen that in a lot of M&A kind of reports, and where people are adding is in capabilities. So when I say a capability, it could be anything from, SEO to email marketing to just different data driven techniques like attribution or modeling or different things like that we can add that we don't essentially have. And, a lot of it is probably going to be more product driven stuff. So not just, smart people, but something that comes with a product that can be a little bit more sticky to a client that actually has a lot higher margins potentially than just, service based work for hire, commission, hourly rates kind of stuff that we typically do. But where I'm really interested in right now is I think we have a really interesting business around, we're a service-based company. We know how to service clients. We know how to ask the right questions. We know how to get them what they need. We know how to go to market for them. What we're not is we have a product development team, but we're not, we don't have huge R&D budgets to go out and create new products. So I'm thinking more of Empower is how could we be a platform company with really strong service capabilities, add on different products, or tech that essentially people have built when they've seen a need in the market, particularly in marketing services, but need that added layer of service in client relationships that are strong and that we know how to build around an integrated marketing approach. So, marketing myself is like a really strong platform company with really strong, greatly diversified client relationships, strong tenured, people that are kind of like consultants, really high level consultants. So you can start to build these different products around our agency that really, what clients, they don't want that best in class model anymore. They
Right.
want someone that's going to come to them and say, yeah, I can handle all this. And I don't need to talk to 4 or 5 different agencies. I can kind of bring it all together for you.
When you talk about a product, can you give me an example of what you mean by that?
Yeah. So, I would say, big products that I'm looking at right now. So for example, like a dashboarding product. We work with a company called Datorama, for example. And Datorama enables us to build custom dashboards for clients that brings in all their different marketing activity from everything from, all their social media activity to their TV, to their radio, to their print, and all the data and analytics that's around them. It allows you to do some custom modeling. So a lot of that is, we're white labeling it, so to say. It would be interesting if we brought in and had a company that's built, you know, uh, something like that we could actually own and develop ourselves and then retain some of the revenue versus paying it to a third party.
Sure.
Another example might be programmatic media. So, we have our own programmatic media trading desk we call ClearTrade, but it's really a diversification of platforms. So essentially, what if we bought our own platform there which would allow us to build a more customized approach to clients. It would allow us to retain more of the revenue that we're paying out of house to some of these trading desks that we partner with, everything from the trade desk to DV360 to Media Math to all these different partners that we use. If we had something that we had and owned ourselves, that would be interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have a client right now that's under LOI that should close here at the end of the month. It's a services business, but they have a good core data platform that they've developed and owned on their own. And it's not necessarily revolutionary from a data standpoint, but it will allow the acquirer to have their own proprietary stuff, so they get the margin from that.
Yep.
It also does make it pretty sticky, right? When you have your own stuff. So so that's interesting. When you think about, for Empower, the size of acquisition, sometimes people say it needs to be at least 20 million in revenue or 5 million in EBITDA because it needs to move the needle. And sometimes, particularly if they're looking for a product, they say, hey, something on the smaller end would be great because we can build in a bunch of the value post-close. How are you thinking about size?
I'd say, 5 to 20 million in revenue, with really strong improving margins. I don't think I'd really want to do, and can show profitability right off the bat,
Right.
I don't want to be a venture capitalist or anyone like that. I want to bring in something because I want a business or a business that's already cash flowing,
Sure.
and wants to. I'd say a lot of businesses too. What I've noticed is that you get some really smart people who have built something and found a need, but there's two things they don't like to do generally: work with clients and do business development. And and I feel like those are things we've been doing for 38 years. We know how to do that. So someone that's like, I got a really great product, but I don't know how to grow it. I think SaaS-based models I'm really interested in. I'm learning kind of how SaaS works and pricing and how it's sold and how it's built. That's something I'm very interested in too, because I think we could help a lot of kind of more SaaS-based products too.
Right. So let me wrap us up. First comment I'll make is this: wherever people are listening to this, if you go to secondbitepodcast.com, you'll see the show notes, and your email information is in there. My email information is in there. So if somebody wants to have a conversation, I know you're pretty difficult to actually get through to or to be able to reach because you're pretty busy. I'm much easier because I'm supposed to be much easier to get to. But if somebody thinks they have something of interest and want to talk to you about it, reach out to me or reach out to you. And that's probably the easiest way to do that, because contact information will be there. One way I typically end our conversations, Jim, you've been really successful in your career, in your community life, in your family life, and in the rest. Is there anything that you would point to, whether it's a book that you've read, an experience that you've had, a mentor that was critical to you, that you would attribute your level of success to?
Great question, Todd. Yes. If I had to point to one thing, well, if you don't mind, I'd like to point to two. Well, one that led to where I had, but I think everybody. I did this. I went through with YPI. With our little forum, we went through everybody probably might be familiar with Simon Sinek and the Find Your Why exercise. So, I went through that. I got to my own why statement, which is it led me to an empower purpose statement. It led me, in my why statement is to change the game so the dreams of others come true. So that pushed me to a point to where I realized, like, I really enjoy change. I thrive around change, but really what I really am out to do is to help the folks that I work, the dreams of others come true. I think about that too. If I think about acquisition, like I want to work with someone that my first question now to people that I want to go hire, and that's not the first question, but it's always a question, is what is your dream? And it's funny when you ask people that question, they start to think like a little bit bigger, and they think a little bit broader, and they think about themselves a little bit more and what they want to accomplish. And that's really interesting. So that was instrumental, but also we're a value-driven organization. So we have 6 really, really great values. Breakfast first, let's be clear, plant the flag, yes, and dust yourself off and make it personal. And I sit down with every new employee, in groups every month. I take them through those values. I tell them why it's important that we uphold those, what it means to me and the company. And, I think about those a lot, and they're my filter for everything I do, my purpose statement and our values. And that's kind of kept me on point. So those are really the 2 big things, right?
Well, that's great and super helpful. This whole conversation has been helpful, and it really helpful when somebody is, I think, as generous and transparent as you have been in this conversation, Jim. So, what I'd like to do is invite you to come back maybe in a year or 2 when either you've got a private equity partner or you've done another acquisition, or you just kind of continue to advance the mission so we can watch your progress. But I'll say thank you very much, and I appreciate your spending time with us.
No, thank you, Todd, and great to be with you.
Thanks for listening to the Second Bite podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.